6-year-old Emma pressed her baby brother against her chest. Both children huddled beneath a snow-heavy pine in the Alaskan wilderness at -28 degrees. Her cracked lips whispered through chattering teeth, "Please don't let him find us," as she used her small body as a shield against the wind that cut through the forest like a blade. The silence wasn't natural. A low growl rumbled from the white mist, and a massive she-wolf emerged, amber eyes fixed on the children, followed by an old man whose weathered face carried both pain and fierce determination. The wolf's hackles rose, but not in aggression. Emma's frozen fingers clutched a wooden wolf toy, carved years ago by hands she couldn't remember. The old man stopped mid-step, his breath catching as recognition hit him like a physical blow. "Tommy's little girl," he whispered, and his voice cracked with 23 years of buried guilt. Behind them, engine sounds echoed through the trees. Time was running out. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The remote wilderness of Alaska had been William Bill Harper's sanctuary for 7 years, ever since he'd buried his last hope along with his wife Sarah in the Fairbanks Veterans Cemetery. At 68, the former cavalry soldier carried the weight of Vietnam in his shoulders and the ghost of his best friend Tommy Chen in his conscience. Tommy had died in Bill's arms during the Tet Offensive, bleeding out in a rice paddy while clutching a letter from his little sister back home. "Promise me, Harper," Tommy had gasped through blood-frothed lips. "If something happens to me, you look after Victoria. She's all alone in this world." Bill had promised, but by the time he'd made it home, the girl had vanished into the foster system, and he'd been too broken by war to keep searching. His 160-acre property sat 30 miles from the nearest neighbor, accessible only by a logging road that disappeared under snow for half the year. The log cabin he'd built with his own hands served as both home and fortress, filled with the silence of a man who'd learned that solitude was safer than attachment. The walls held no photographs, no memories, only the tools of survival and the echo of conversations he held with ghosts. Luna had changed everything. 7 years ago, he'd found her as a weeks-old pup, whimpering beside her mother's body near the old mining road. Poachers had killed the adult wolf for her pelt, leaving the hybrid cub to starve. Against every piece of conventional wisdom about wild animals, Bill had bottle-fed her, raised her, and discovered that Luna possessed an intelligence that bordered on the supernatural. She could open doors, understand complex commands, and read human emotions with an accuracy that unnerved visitors to his remote homestead. The she-wolf stood 30 inches at the shoulder, her coat a mix of silver and charcoal that caught the light like polished steel. Her amber eyes held an ancient wisdom that made grown men uncomfortable, but children seemed to recognize something familiar in her gaze. Luna had saved Bill's life 3 winters ago when he'd suffered a heart attack while checking his trap lines. She'd dragged him half a mile through snow to the cabin, then howled until the volunteer fire department had followed the sound to his door. Now, as he stared at the small girl clutching the wooden wolf he'd carved years ago during a drunken night of remembering Tommy, Bill felt the weight of Providence settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. The child had her father's dark hair and her mother's stubborn chin, but it was the trust in her eyes that broke something loose in his chest. Luna stepped forward slowly, her massive frame lowering into a submissive crouch as she approached the children. The she-wolf had never shown fear of humans, but she'd also never shown this particular gentleness. She extended her muzzle toward baby Lucas, sniffing carefully, then looked back at Bill with what could only be described as recognition. Behind them, the distant rumble of an engine grew closer, and Bill's military training kicked in like muscle memory. Someone was coming, and in this wilderness, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The blizzard had started 3 hours before Victoria Chen Morrison made the most desperate decision of her life. Standing in the bathroom of their Anchorage apartment at 4 in the morning, she stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror and whispered the words that would change everything. "We're leaving today." Her hands shook as she packed the diaper bag, moving with the practiced silence of someone who'd learned that survival meant invisibility. Marcus lay sleeping in their bed, his breathing deep and regular, but Victoria knew that any moment he could wake and catch her. The $247 she'd saved from grocery money over 6 months was hidden inside Lucas's formula container, along with the bus tickets to Fairbanks she'd bought using a fake name. Emma appeared in the doorway, still clutching the wooden wolf toy she'd carried since childhood, her dark eyes far too knowing for a 6-year-old. "Are we going to find the wolf man, Mama?" she whispered, and Victoria's heart nearly stopped. Her daughter had been asking about the mysterious figure from her earliest memories for months, the kind stranger who'd given her the carved toy during one of Lucas's many hospital visits. "Maybe, baby," Victoria whispered back, because she'd run out of safe lies to tell. The truth was that she remembered Bill Harper from her brother Tommy's letters, remembered how Tommy had written about his army buddy who sees the good in broken things. Tommy had died before Emma was born, but his stories about Bill had stayed with Victoria through foster care, through nursing school, through the loneliness that had made Marcus's attention seem like salvation instead of the trap it became. The decision to run had crystallized the night before, when she'd found Marcus standing over Lucas's crib at 2 in the morning just watching. The baby had been crying, but Marcus hadn't picked him up, hadn't tried to comfort him. He just stood there with that expression she'd learned to fear, the one that meant he was thinking about control and possession and the twisted psychology degree he'd lost after what happened to his first family. "He's going to be different," Marcus had said without turning around. "Lucas won't have the same defiance issues as Emma. I can shape him properly from the beginning." The clinical detachment in his voice had made Victoria's skin crawl, and she'd realized with horrible clarity that Marcus saw her children not as people to love, but as projects to control. Now, as she strapped Lucas into his car seat while Emma climbed silently into the back, Victoria whispered a prayer to a God she wasn't sure was listening. The plan was simple: drive north to Fairbanks, catch the morning bus to Denali, and find the only person Tommy had ever trusted completely. Bill Harper lived somewhere near the national park. That much she knew from the return address on the Christmas cards he'd sent years ago, before she'd gotten too scared to maintain contact with anyone from her past. The Toyota Camry's engine turned over on the third try, and Victoria felt a moment of pure terror as the headlights swept across their apartment complex. Any second, Marcus could wake up and discover them gone. Any second, he could call his friends at Child Protective Services and report her as an unfit mother attempting kidnapping. He'd done it before, during her last escape attempt, and she'd learned that in Alaska, a man with the right connections could make a woman disappear legally. The drive through Anchorage's empty streets felt like moving through a dream. Emma sat quietly, occasionally whispering to her wooden wolf, while Lucas slept fitfully in his carrier. Victoria had memorized the route: Highway 3 north for 4 hours, then the park's highway toward Denali. She had enough gas to get there, enough formula to keep Lucas fed, and just enough hope to believe that somewhere in the wilderness, a stranger would remember a promise made to a dying soldier. The snow started falling harder as they left the city limits, and Victoria's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Behind her, Emma began humming a lullaby she'd learned from one of the other army wives, back when Victoria still believed that marrying Marcus would give her children the father they deserved. The irony wasn't lost on her now. She was running toward the wilderness to save her family from the man who was supposed to protect them. "Mama," Emma said quietly as they passed the last gas station for 50 miles. "The Wolfman will help us, right?" "Tommy Daddy told you he would?" Victoria caught her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror and nodded, because sometimes a mother's job was to believe in miracles she couldn't see, to have faith in strangers she'd never met, and to trust that love could survive even in the frozen heart of Alaska. The road ahead disappeared into swirling white, but Victoria pressed the accelerator anyway, carrying her children toward an uncertain salvation in the wilderness. The recognition hit Bill like a sniper's bullet to the chest. Those dark eyes, that stubborn tilt of the chin, the way she held her brother with desperate protectiveness. This wasn't just any lost child. This was Tommy Chen's blood, the family he'd sworn to protect 23 years ago in a jungle halfway around the world. "Sweet Jesus," he breathed, and Luna's ears swiveled toward him, reading the change in his voice. The she-wolf had been with him long enough to understand that certain tones meant everything was about to change. She moved closer to the children, her massive frame creating a windbreak against the howling storm. Emma looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone who should still believe in fairy tales. "You're him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You're the Wolfman from my dreams. You gave me this." She held up the wooden carving with fingers so numb they could barely grip. Bill knelt slowly, his arthritic knees protesting against the frozen ground. Up close he could see that baby Lucas was barely breathing, his tiny lips tinged blue despite being wrapped in Emma's torn coat. The boy was maybe 3 months old and hypothermia was setting in fast. In the Army, Bill had seen what cold could do to a human body, especially one this small. "How long have you been out here, sweetheart?" he asked Emma, trying to keep his voice steady while his mind raced through medical triage. The girl was shivering violently, but she was talking, which meant her core temperature hadn't dropped too far yet. The baby was the priority. "Since the car stopped," Emma replied, and Bill noticed she wasn't crying. 6 years old, and she'd already learned that tears froze in weather like this. "Mama told me to find you if the bad man came. She said you had a promise to keep." The words hit him like a physical blow. Victoria had remembered. After all these years, Tommy's little sister had remembered the soldier who'd promised to watch over her family. Bill felt something crack open in his chest, a place that had been frozen solid since he'd come home from Vietnam, to find that his war buddy's sister had been lost to the system. Luna moved past him then, approaching the children with the careful deliberation she used around wounded animals. She sniffed gently at Lucas, her nose barely touching the baby's blanket, then looked back at Bill with an expression he'd learned to read over 7 years together. The message was clear. The little one was in trouble, and they needed to move fast. "Can you walk, Emma?" Bill asked, already shrugging out of his heavy parka. The girl nodded, though he could see her legs shaking beneath her torn jeans. He wrapped his coat around both children, then lifted them as carefully as he could manage. At 68, his back wasn't what it used to be, but adrenaline and purpose gave him strength he'd forgotten he possessed. Luna led the way back toward the cabin, her powerful legs cutting through snow that would have stopped a smaller animal. She moved with purpose, occasionally looking back to ensure Bill was keeping pace. The she-wolf had an uncanny ability to find the safest path through terrain that would challenge an experienced outdoorsman, and Bill had long since learned to trust her instincts over his own. The cabin sat in a clearing protected by ancient pines, smoke rising from the chimney like a promise of warmth. Bill had built it himself after buying the land with his disability pension, every log cut and fitted by hands that needed something to do besides shake with nightmares. It was simple but solid. One main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a root cellar that stayed above freezing even in the worst weather. Inside, he laid the children on the old couch near the fire, wrapping them in every blanket he owned. Luna immediately positioned herself between the door and the children, her ears constantly moving as she monitored sounds from outside. The she-wolf's behavior confirmed what Bill's instincts were already telling him. Whoever these children were running from, the danger was real and probably close behind. Emma's eyes followed his every movement as he checked Lucas's breathing and pulse. The baby was hypothermic but stable, and Bill's Army medic training kicked in automatically. Warm liquids, gradual reheating, monitor for shock. He'd done this before, in conditions far worse than a heated cabin. "Your mama," he said quietly, while preparing formula with hands that moved from muscle memory. "What happened to her?" Emma's voice was small but steady. "The car went off the road when he started following us. Mama hit her head real bad, but she made me promise to take Lucas and run. She said the wolfman would know what to do." She paused, then added with the devastating honesty of childhood, "Is Mama going to die?" Bill met her eyes, seeing Tommy's courage reflected there. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I can promise you this. Nobody's going to hurt you or your brother while you're here. That's what your Uncle Tommy would have wanted." Luna's low growl interrupted them, and Bill's blood went cold. The she-wolf was staring at the door, her hackles raised and her body tense. Someone was coming up the mountain road, and Luna's behavior meant it wasn't the Alaska State Troopers Bill had been hoping for. Through the window, headlights cut through the falling snow, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who knew exactly where they were going. The first 48 hours in Bill's cabin established a rhythm that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Emma had claimed the spot closest to the fireplace, creating a fortress of blankets where she could monitor both her sleeping brother and the door simultaneously. Her hypervigilance reminded Bill of his own behavior during those first months back from Vietnam, when every shadow could hide an enemy and sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford. Luna had appointed herself as the children's guardian, positioning her massive frame where she could see all entrances while keeping the kids within protective reach. The she-wolf's behavior fascinated Bill. He'd raised her from a pup, but he'd never seen her display such deliberate, almost human-like protective instincts. She seemed to understand that Emma needed space to process trauma, while Lucas required constant monitoring for signs of illness. "You know," Bill said on the second morning, watching Emma carefully spoon formula into Lucas's mouth, "your Uncle Tommy used to tell me about a little girl who could make anyone smile, even on the worst days. Said she had magic in her hands." Emma looked up from feeding her brother, and for the first time since he'd found them, she almost smiled. "Mama tells me stories about Uncle Tommy," she said quietly. "She says he was brave like a soldier and gentle like a daddy. She cries sometimes when she talks about him, but they're happy tears." She paused, then added with devastating honesty, "I think Mama forgot how to have happy tears until Marcus came." Then she forgot again. The satellite phone rang at noon, cutting through the peaceful silence like an alarm. Bill had been expecting the call from Alaska State Troopers, but when he answered, the voice on the other end made his blood run cold. "Mr. Harper, this is Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Fairbanks Memorial Hospital. We have a patient here, Victoria Morrison, who was asking for you before she lost consciousness. She was in a severe car accident yesterday morning, and we found your contact information in her personal effects." Bill's hand tightened on the phone. "How is she?" "Serious head trauma, but stable. She keeps saying something about her children and a wooden wolf. The strange thing is, she has no children with her, and her husband claims they're safe at home. But she's agitated isn't the right word. She's terrified." Through the window, Bill watched Emma playing peekaboo with Lucas, using animated expressions to make her brother gurgle with what might have been laughter. The contrast between the children's fragile safety and their mother's terror struck him like a physical blow. "Doctor, those children are here with me. They're safe, but their mother was right to be terrified. "Don't let anyone take them from this room until Alaska State Troopers arrive." The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Bill to wonder if the connection had dropped. Finally, Dr. Mitchell spoke again, her voice careful and professional. "Mr. Harper, I need to ask you directly. Are these children in any immediate danger?" "Yes," Bill said simply. "And so is their mother." That evening, as snow continued to fall in sheets that turned the world beyond the windows into a white void, Bill sat across from Emma at his small kitchen table. She was teaching Luna to shake hands, patiently guiding the she-wolf's massive paw through the motion while Lucas dozed in a makeshift bassinet nearby. "Emma," Bill said carefully, "can you tell me about Marcus? About what happened at home?" The little girl's hand stilled on Luna's fur, and the she-wolf immediately pressed closer, offering comfort with the intuitive understanding that had always amazed Bill. Emma was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer, but when she finally spoke, her words came out in a rush. "He watches us all the time, even when we're sleeping. Mama has to ask permission to buy groceries or talk to neighbors or take Lucas to the doctor. He says it's because he loves us, but Luna would never make someone afraid if she loved them." She looked up at Bill with eyes that held far too much wisdom. "Animals know the difference between love and being trapped, don't they?" Before Bill could respond, Luna's entire body went rigid. Her ears swiveled toward the front of the cabin, and a low growl rumbled from deep in her chest. Bill had learned to read these signals over 7 years of partnership. Someone was approaching through the woods, moving carefully enough to avoid detection, but not carefully enough to fool a wolf's senses. Bill moved to the window and peered through a gap in the curtains. 3 sets of headlights were positioned at strategic points around his property, close enough to surround the cabin but far enough away to avoid immediate detection. Professional positioning. These weren't lost tourists or concerned neighbors. "Emma," he said quietly, his voice carrying the calm authority he'd learned in combat, "I need you to take Lucas to the back bedroom and get under the bed. Stay there until I come get you, no matter what you hear." The little girl nodded without argument, gathering her brother with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that obedience could mean survival. As she carried Lucas toward the bedroom, she paused in the doorway. "Mr. Bill, Luna's coming with us, right?" Bill looked at the she-wolf, who was now pacing near the door with the controlled aggression of a predator preparing for battle. Her amber eyes met his, and he saw something there that made his chest tight. Recognition, understanding, and a determination that reminded him uncomfortably of soldiers who knew they probably weren't coming home. "Yeah, sweetheart," he lied, knowing that Luna would never leave him to face whatever was coming alone. "She'll be right there with you." The first knock on the door came at exactly 8 o'clock, polite and measured. Bill checked the load in his Winchester and moved toward the front window. A man stood on his porch, tall and thin, with carefully styled dark hair, wearing an expensive coat that had no business in the Alaskan wilderness. "Mr. Harper?" the man called through the door. "My name is Marcus Morrison. I believe you have my children." Even through the wooden door, Bill could hear the practiced authority in the voice, the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. This was a man who'd learned to weaponize psychology, to use knowledge as a tool for control rather than healing. "Can't say I do," Bill replied, his hand steady on the rifle. "You might be looking for someone else." Marcus's laugh carried no humor. "Sir, I understand you're trying to help, but you don't understand the situation. Victoria Morrison is mentally unstable. She's taken my children without authorization, and she's filled my stepdaughter's head with dangerous fantasies about strangers who can't possibly exist." Through the back window, Bill caught movement in the tree line. More people, positioning themselves for what looked like a coordinated assault. Professional tactics. Marcus hadn't come alone, and he hadn't come to negotiate. Luna appeared beside him, moving with the silent grace that still amazed him after all these years. The she-wolf carried something in her mouth. Emma's beloved stuffed rabbit, the one she'd been clutching when he found them. Luna dropped it at his feet, then used her nose to push aside the rabbit's fur, revealing something that made Bill's blood turn to ice. A small electronic device, no bigger than a quarter, nestled inside the toy's stuffing. A tracking device. Marcus had been following them electronically, which meant he'd known exactly where they were from the moment Emma had picked up that rabbit. "Clever bastard," Bill muttered, and Luna's tail moved in what might have been agreement. The she-wolf's intelligence had always bordered on the uncanny, but tonight she seemed to understand the full scope of the threat they were facing. From the bedroom came the soft sound of Emma singing to her brother, a lullaby that reminded Bill of songs his own mother had sung during the Depression, when hope was something you had to manufacture from whatever scraps you could find. The sound strengthened his resolve in ways that 30 years of therapy hadn't managed. Marcus knocked again, harder this time. "Mr. Harper, I'm going to ask you one more time to return my children. I have legal custody, and I have people here who can verify my authority. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Bill moved away from the door and picked up his satellite phone. The device was military-grade, designed to work in conditions that would kill civilian equipment. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Sergeant Major Robert Tank Patterson, Alaska State Troopers. A man who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan and understood that some battles couldn't be won with paperwork. "Tank, it's Bill Harper. I need you to run a background check on a Marcus Morrison, probably from Anchorage, and I need it fast." Tank's voice crackled through the speaker. "What's the situation, Bill?" "I've got 2 kids here, running from what looks like an abusive situation. The man claiming to be their father just showed up with backup, and something doesn't smell right. Give me 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes stretched like hours. Bill watched through the windows as Marcus's team repositioned themselves, clearly growing impatient with negotiation. Luna paced between the front door and the bedroom where the children were hiding, her behavior becoming more agitated as she sensed the increasing threat. When the phone rang again, Tank's voice was grim. "Bill, you need to know what you're dealing with. Marcus Morrison, 38, former child psychologist. Lost his license 3 years ago after allegations of inappropriate treatment of minors. Before that, he was investigated in connection with his daughter's death in a car accident while he was driving under the influence." Bill felt the pieces clicking together like the mechanism of a well-oiled rifle. "What about the wife?" "Victoria Chen Morrison, pediatric nurse, clean record, but here's the thing that'll interest you. Maiden name was Chen. Any relation to a Tommy Chen?" The phone nearly slipped from Bill's numb fingers. "Tommy Chen was my battle buddy in Vietnam. Died in my arms in 1971. "Then you know why she ran," Tank said quietly. "Morrison's been using his psychology background to systematically isolate and control her. We've had 3 domestic disturbance calls to their address in the past 6 months, but she always recanted. Classic pattern." Outside, Marcus had stopped pretending to be patient. Bill could see him gesturing to his companions, and the men were spreading out in a pattern that looked disturbingly like the search and destroy formations Bill remembered from the war. "Tank, how fast can you get here? Storm's got us grounded for at least 6 hours, maybe 12. You're on your own until then." Bill closed his phone and looked at Luna, who was watching him with those eerily intelligent amber eyes. The she-wolf had been with him through his darkest nights, had pulled him back from the edge more times than he could count. Now she was asking him a question he could read in her posture. "Are we fighting or running?" Bill picked up his rifle and checked the action. At 68, running wasn't really an option anymore. Besides, he'd spent 43 years running from the promise he'd made to a dying boy in a Vietnamese jungle. Tommy had trusted him to protect what mattered most, and Bill had failed once already. "We fight," he told Luna, quietly. The she-wolf's tail moved once, a brief acknowledgement, and she padded toward the bedroom where Emma was still singing softly to her brother. Bill watched her go, knowing that whatever happened in the next few hours would determine whether he finally kept his word to a friend who died believing that some promises were sacred enough to outlast even death itself. The siege began at dawn with the kind of psychological warfare that Marcus Morrison had perfected during his years as a child psychologist. His voice carried across the frozen clearing with practiced authority, the tone of a man who'd learned to make reason sound like madness and control feel like love. "Emma, sweetheart, Daddy's here to take you home," he called from somewhere beyond the tree line. "Mommy's in the hospital, and she needs you to be a good girl and come back to Daddy. Uncle Lucas needs his bottles and his special medicine." Bill watched Emma's reaction from across the cabin's main room. The 6-year-old's face went pale, but she didn't run toward the voice. Instead, she pulled Lucas closer and looked at Bill with eyes that held a question no child should have to ask. "Can I trust you more than the man who raised me?" Luna's behavior provided the answer Emma needed. The she-wolf positioned herself between the door and the children, her massive frame tense but controlled. Her amber eyes never left the windows, tracking movement patterns that Bill's human senses couldn't detect. After 7 years together, Bill had learned to read Luna's body language like a military tactical manual, and right now she was telling him that Marcus hadn't come alone. "Mr. Harper," came a different voice, female and professionally crisp. "This is Janet Miller from Alaska Child Protective Services. I have court orders authorizing the immediate return of these children to their legal guardian. Please don't make this situation more traumatic for them than it already is." Bill moved to the window and spotted her through his binoculars, a woman in her 50s wearing a government-issued parka, holding official-looking documents. But something about her positioning bothered him. She stood too close to cover, moved with too much awareness of sight lines. This wasn't standard social worker behavior. "Emma," he said quietly, "have you ever seen that lady before?" The little girl crept to the window and peered out carefully. Her sharp intake of breath told Bill everything he needed to know. "She came to our apartment twice. Marcus called her Aunt Janet, but Mama said she wasn't really our aunt. Mama didn't like her. Said she asked too many questions about private things." The pieces were falling into place with the terrible clarity of a chess game played by someone who understood the rules better than his opponents. Marcus had cultivated allies within the system, people who could legitimize his control through official channels. In Alaska, where resources were stretched thin and oversight was minimal, a corrupt social worker could make children disappear legally. Bill's satellite phone buzzed with a text message from Tank Patterson. "Background check reveals more. Morrison under investigation for insurance fraud related to daughter's death. Also flagged for suspicious interactions with 3 other single mothers in Anchorage area. 2 of those women reported harassment, then suddenly dropped charges." The old soldier felt familiar ice settling in his veins, the cold calculation that had kept him alive in Vietnam when emotions would have gotten him killed. This wasn't just about one damaged man trying to keep his family together. This was a pattern, a system, and Emma and Lucas weren't Marcus's first victims. Luna's low growl interrupted his thoughts. Through the back window, Bill spotted movement in the trees behind his cabin. 2 men in winter camouflage were advancing through the forest, using techniques that suggested military or law enforcement training. Marcus had brought professionals, not just desperate accomplices. "You know what I think?" Emma said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. "I think Luna knows things we don't know, like how she always knows when the weather's gonna change, or when someone's sad even if they're trying to hide it." She scratched behind the she-wolf's ears, and Luna leaned into the touch with obvious pleasure. Mama says animals are better at truth than people sometimes. Bill knelt beside them, struck by the simple wisdom in Emma's observation. What kind of truth does Luna know about Marcus? Emma considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd learned that her answers might determine her survival. She knows he's not safe. Even when he's being nice, Luna's fur stands up when he's around. And she never lies about danger. She paused, then added with devastating clarity. People lie about love all the time. But Luna never lies about protecting. The psychological manipulation continued outside, with Marcus alternating between threats and pleading. Emma, Daddy bought you that new dollhouse for Christmas, remember? And Lucas has all his special formula at home. You can't keep them healthy in that old cabin, Mr. Harper. They need proper medical care. But Bill noticed something in Marcus's voice that professional negotiators would recognize: escalating frustration. The man was used to compliance, accustomed to having his authority acknowledged without question. Every minute that Bill refused to surrender the children was eroding Marcus's carefully constructed facade of reasonable concern. "Bill," came Tank's voice over the radio, "I'm monitoring police frequencies. Morrison's people called in a report claiming you're holding children against their will. They're trying to get emergency authorization for forced entry. How long do I have?" "Maybe an hour before they get a judge to sign off. But Bill, there's something else. The hospital called. Victoria Morrison woke up asking for you specifically. She says she has information about Morrison that could put him away for life, but she'll only talk to you." Bill looked across the cabin at Emma, who was now singing a lullaby to Lucas in a voice that wavered between childhood innocence and premature maturity. The little girl was trying so hard to be brave, to be the protector her mother had asked her to be, and the sight of her small shoulders carrying such enormous responsibility made something fierce and protective rise in Bill's chest. Luna seemed to sense his emotional shift. The she-wolf moved closer, pressing her massive head against his leg in the gesture of comfort she'd learned to offer during his worst nightmares. Her presence reminded him of something Tank had said years ago. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is the hardest thing you'll ever do. Outside, Marcus's voice took on a different tone, sharper and more commanding. "Mr. Harper, you're interfering with a custody situation involving my legal dependents. I'm trying to resolve this peacefully, but I have people here who are authorized to use necessary force to protect these children from an unstable situation." Bill moved to his gun cabinet and began loading additional magazines with the muscle memory of someone who'd done this countless times under pressure. But as he worked, Emma appeared beside him, her small hand touching his arm. "Mr. Bill," she said quietly, "Uncle Tommy talks to you sometimes, doesn't he? When you think nobody's listening?" The question stopped Bill cold. He'd never told anyone about the conversations he held with Tommy's memory, the way he still found himself explaining decisions to a friend who'd been dead for decades. "How did you know that, sweetheart?" Emma's smile was sad and knowing. "Because I talked to Daddy, too. The real one, not Marcus. And Daddy told me in a dream that Uncle Tommy sent us to you because you know how to keep promises." She paused, then added with the devastating honesty of childhood, "Even the really hard ones." Outside, the sound of engines grew closer, and Bill realized that the conversation period was officially over. Marcus had run out of patience, and whatever came next would be settled with actions rather than words. Luna positioned herself by the door, her body language shifting into the focused intensity Bill recognized from her hunting behavior. But tonight, the she-wolf wasn't stalking prey. She was preparing to defend her pack even if it cost her everything. The attack came at midnight with the precision of a military operation. Bill had been expecting it, watching through his night vision scope as Marcus's team moved into final positions around the cabin. 3 men plus Marcus himself, all wearing tactical gear that suggested this wasn't their first coordinated assault on a civilian target. The first explosion shattered the kitchen window, followed immediately by a flashbang grenade that filled the main room with blinding light and deafening sound. Bill's Vietnam training kicked in automatically, muscle memory overriding the panic that tried to flood his system. He rolled behind the heavy oak table he'd positioned earlier, rifle ready, as boots pounded across his front porch. Luna's reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The she-wolf launched herself at the first figure through the window with the focused fury of a predator protecting cubs. Her jaws closed around the man's forearm with bone-crushing force, and his scream cut through the tactical chaos like a blade. The intruder's weapon clattered across the floor as Luna dragged him down, her growls reverberating through the small space. From the bedroom came Emma's voice, high and clear above the noise. "It's okay, Lucas. Luna's here. She won't let them take us." The 6-year-old's courage in the face of terror reminded Bill why soldiers fought, why some things were worth dying for. Bill fired a warning shot over the heads of the second wave of attackers, the Winchester's boom echoing off the cabin walls like thunder. "Federal law protects citizens defending their homes against unlawful entry," he shouted. "Next shot won't be a warning." Marcus's voice cut through the chaos from outside. "Stand down! He's got civilians in there." But Bill caught the edge of panic in the man's tone. This wasn't going according to Marcus's careful plan, and a psychologist accustomed to controlling every variable was watching his operation fall apart. The wounded man Luna had attacked was trying to crawl toward the door, leaving a trail of blood across Bill's floor. The she-wolf stood over him, not attacking further but making it clear that any sudden movement would end badly. Her amber eyes found Bill's across the room, and he read the question there. What now? Before Bill could respond, Emma appeared in the bedroom doorway, despite his orders to stay hidden. She took one look at the chaos, at Luna standing guard over the bleeding intruder, and her face transformed with an expression Bill had seen on her mother's face in old photographs Tommy had carried, pure, stubborn determination. "You're hurting Luna," she said to the wounded man, her voice carrying an authority that seemed impossible from someone so small. "She doesn't want to hurt you, but she will if you try to take us." The man looked up at Emma, blood running down his arm, and something in his expression shifted. Bill realized with shock that this wasn't a hardened criminal. This was someone who'd been convinced he was doing the right thing, someone Marcus had manipulated just as effectively as he'd manipulated Victoria. "Jesus," the man whispered. "She's just a baby. Morrison, you said they were in immediate danger, that the old man was—" "Shut up, Rick!" Marcus's voice snapped from outside, but the damage was done. The wounded man's reaction had confirmed what Bill suspected. Marcus had lied to his own team about the nature of their mission. Luna moved away from the injured man, her attention now focused entirely on the windows, where movement suggested the remaining attackers were regrouping. Her behavior had shifted again, from aggressive defense to something more complex. She was reading the situation, understanding that not everyone outside was equally threatening. Bill kept his rifle trained on the broken window while processing what he'd just witnessed. Emma's natural empathy, even in the face of danger, had accomplished something his military training couldn't. She'd turned an enemy into a witness. The wounded man was staring at her with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was cracking apart. "Emma," Bill said quietly, "I need you to go back to your brother, now." But the little girl shook her head. "Luna needs me to stay. She's trying to tell us something." Emma walked slowly toward the she-wolf, her bare feet making no sound on the cold floor. Luna lowered her massive head, allowing Emma to place her small hand on the wolf's neck. What happened next defied everything Bill thought he knew about animal behavior. Luna guided Emma toward the back window, then used her nose to point toward a specific spot in the tree line. Following the she-wolf's indication, Bill spotted the muzzle flash of a sniper rifle positioned behind a fallen log. "Down!" he yelled, tackling Emma and covering her body with his own, just as the window above them exploded in a shower of glass. The shot had come from a different direction than Marcus's voice, confirming Bill's worst fear. They were completely surrounded by people willing to use lethal force. Luna's reaction was immediate and devastating. She charged through the broken window in a single, fluid leap, her powerful body cutting through the falling glass like she was born for battle. Her howl echoed through the forest, primal and challenging, and Bill realized with sick certainty that the she-wolf was sacrificing herself to give them time. The gunfire outside intensified, punctuated by human screams and Luna's savage growls. Bill gathered Emma and ran toward the bedroom where Lucas waited, but the little girl twisted in his arms, desperate to see what was happening to her protector. "Luna!" Emma screamed, her voice breaking with terror. "Don't leave us! Please! Don't leave us!" Through the chaos, Bill heard Marcus shouting orders that revealed the truth about his carefully constructed facade. "Take them down! I don't care about the old man, but I need those children alive. Do you understand me? Alive!" The words hit Bill like a physical blow. Marcus wasn't trying to rescue his family. He was trying to reclaim his possessions, and he was willing to kill anyone who stood in his way, including a 68-year-old veteran and a wolf who'd never hurt anyone except in defense. Emma's sobs cut through Bill's tactical assessment like a knife. She was calling for Luna with the desperation of a child watching her world collapse, and Bill realized that keeping his promise to Tommy meant more than just keeping the children physically safe. It meant protecting their ability to trust, to love, to believe that goodness existed in a world that seemed determined to prove otherwise. Outside, Luna's howls had taken on a different quality, higher pitched and more urgent. Bill recognized the sound from his years studying her behavior. She wasn't just fighting anymore. She was calling for help. And in the distance, answering her call, came the sound that made Marcus Morrison's blood run cold. The howls of wild wolves echoing through the Alaskan night like voices from another world. The truth came in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting different versions of the same nightmare. Bill found Luna behind his woodshed, her silver coat matted with blood, 3 bullet wounds in her side and shoulder. She was still breathing, but each breath came with a wet sound that Bill recognized from too many battlefields. The she-wolf's amber eyes found his, and in them he saw not pain, but urgency. "What is it, girl?" he whispered, kneeling beside her massive frame. Luna's nose pointed toward something clutched in her jaws, a wallet, torn and blood-stained, but intact enough to read the identification inside. Bill's hands trembled as he opened it, and the name on the driver's license made his world tilt sideways. Thomas Chen, not Marcus Morrison. The photograph showed a younger version of the man who'd been calling for the children, but the birth date was wrong, the address was wrong, everything was wrong. Bill's mind raced through the implications as Luna whimpered softly, trying to communicate something vital with her dying strength. Inside the wallet, tucked behind the license, was a folded letter in handwriting that Bill recognized from 40-year-old memories. Tommy's handwriting. His best friend's final letter home, the one Bill had helped him write 3 days before the ambush that killed him. "My dear sister Victoria," the letter began. "If something happens to me, there's a man named William Harper who promised to look after you. He's good people, Vic, the kind who keeps his word even when the world goes to hell. If you ever need help, real help, find Bill Harper in Alaska. Tell him Tommy sent you." Bill's hands shook as the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. The man outside wasn't Marcus Morrison at all. He was using a false identity, and somehow he'd gotten access to Tommy's personal effects, to information that only family should have known. This wasn't just about custody or control. This was about something far more sinister. Luna made a soft sound, drawing his attention to something else in her mouth. Another piece of evidence, a small, digital recorder, its red light still blinking. Bill pressed play with numb fingers, and Marcus's voice filled the cold air with chilling clarity. Day 14 of Integration Protocol. Subject Victoria shows continued resistance to conditioning despite pharmaceutical assistance. Children respond better to isolation techniques combined with authority reinforcement. Emma displays concerning attachment to maternal figures and will require additional behavioral modification. The clinical detachment in Marcus's voice made Bill's stomach turn. This wasn't the language of a concerned stepfather. This was the vocabulary of someone who viewed human beings as experimental subjects, children as projects to be shaped and controlled. The recording continued. Insurance payout from Sarah's accident provides sufficient funding for expanded operations. Have identified 3 additional single mothers fitting target profile. Janet Miller confirms state oversight remains minimal with proper documentation. Bill's blood went cold. Marcus wasn't just an abusive stepfather. He was a predator with a system, someone who'd turned child psychology into a weapon for identifying and exploiting vulnerable families. The mention of Sarah's accident suggested that his own daughter's death might not have been the tragic mistake he claimed. Inside the cabin, Emma's voice called out with rising panic, "Mr. Bill? Luna's not coming back, is she?" Bill gathered the evidence, and Luna's weakening form, carrying the she-wolf back toward the cabin as his mind processed the magnitude of what they were facing. This wasn't just about keeping Tommy's promise anymore. This was about stopping someone who'd weaponized the foster care system, turned protective services into a hunting ground for damaged men who viewed children as possessions to be acquired and modified. As he reached the cabin door, his satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Bill answered cautiously, and Victoria's voice came through weak but determined. "Bill? Dr. Mitchell said you have my children. Are they safe?" "They're safe," Bill replied, his eyes on Emma's worried face through the window. "But Victoria, I need you to listen carefully. The man you married, Marcus Morrison, that's not his real name." The silence stretched long enough that Bill wondered if the connection had dropped. When Victoria finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. "I know," she whispered. "I've known for weeks. I found papers hidden in his office, birth certificates, social security cards, 3 different identities. I was trying to figure out how to get help when he caught me planning to leave." "Why didn't you go to the police?" Victoria's bitter laugh carried no humor. "Because half the police know him as Dr. Marcus Thompson, the respected child psychologist who volunteers with at-risk families. The other half know him as Mark Morris, the consultant who helps with difficult custody cases. He's got people everywhere, Bill. People who owe him favors, people who believe his story about helping troubled children." Through the window, Bill watched the real Marcus circling his cabin like a predator, no longer bothering with the facade of concerned parent. His movements were calculated, patient, those of someone who'd done this before and knew how to wait for the right moment to strike. "There's more," Victoria continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I found medical records from his time in Nevada. Before he lost his license, he was experimenting with behavioral modification techniques on foster children. Drugs, isolation, systematic breaking down of family attachments. 3 children died in his care, officially ruled as suicides." The phone crackled with static, but Victoria's next words came through clearly. "He didn't choose me randomly, Bill. He studied me. Knew about Tommy. Knew about you. Knew that I had no family support system. I was perfect prey. Bill felt rage building in his chest, the cold fury he remembered from Vietnam when he'd discovered evidence of war crimes. But underneath the anger was something else, the terrible understanding that Luna was dying to protect children from a monster who'd perfected the art of hiding in plain sight. Emma appeared at his elbow, her small face pale but determined. "Is Mama okay?" she asked quietly. "She's going to be fine, sweetheart," Bill replied, though he could see Marcus's team preparing for their final assault through the windows. "But I need you to be very brave for just a little longer." Emma nodded, then looked down at Luna, who was struggling to lift her massive head. The she-wolf's breathing was labored, each exhale creating small puffs of vapor in the cold air, but her eyes were still alert, still focused on protecting her pack. "Luna knows, doesn't she?" Emma said with the devastating insight of childhood. "She knows the bad man isn't really our daddy." Bill knelt beside them both, one hand on Emma's shoulder, the other stroking Luna's bloodied fur. "Animals always know, sweetheart. They can smell lies the way we smell smoke." Outside, Marcus's voice had taken on a different quality, sharper and more desperate. "Harper, I know you can hear me. Send out the children and nobody else has to get hurt." "You don't understand what you're interfering with." But Bill understood perfectly now. Marcus had built an entire operation around exploiting the system designed to protect children, turning social workers into accomplices, and using his psychology training to identify the most vulnerable targets. Victoria and her children weren't his first victims, and if Bill failed tonight, they wouldn't be his last. Luna made a soft sound, barely audible above the wind howling through the broken windows. Bill leaned closer, and the she-wolf used the last of her strength to push something toward him with her nose. Another piece of evidence she'd torn from one of the attackers. A photograph of a young girl with dark hair and frightened eyes. On the back, written in Marcus's clinical handwriting, "Sarah Thompson, age 7, behavioral modification complete. Ready for placement." The photograph showed Marcus's supposed dead daughter, very much alive, but with the hollow expression of a child whose spirit had been systematically broken. Bill realized with horror that Sarah's death had been another lie, another layer in Marcus's elaborate system of control and manipulation. Emma saw the photograph and gasped. "That's the girl from my nightmares," she whispered. "She tells me to run, to hide, to never let him take me to the quiet room." Luna's final gift to them wasn't just evidence. It was validation that Emma's terrors were real, that her instincts about Marcus had been accurate from the beginning, and that sometimes a 6-year-old's understanding of good and evil was clearer than any adult's rationalization. As Luna's breathing became more labored, Emma lay down beside the she-wolf, placing her small hand on the animal's heaving side. "Thank you for keeping us safe," she whispered. "Thank you for being our wolf." Luna's tail moved once, a final gesture of love and loyalty, before her amber eyes closed and her breathing stopped entirely. In that moment, something died in Bill Harper's chest, too. But something else was born. The absolute certainty that Marcus Morrison, whatever his real name was, would not walk away from this mountain alive. The moment Luna's breathing stopped, something fundamental shifted in the cabin's atmosphere. Emma's small hand remained on the she-wolf's still chest, her tears falling silently onto silver fur that would never again rise with breath. Bill felt 43 years of survivor's guilt crystallize into a single, burning certainty. He would not lose another family member to violence. Not today, not ever again. Outside, Marcus's voice carried a new edge of desperation. "Harper, I know the wolf is dead. Send out my children and we can end this peacefully. You're an old man fighting a war you can't win." But Bill had been in unwinnable wars before, and he'd learned that sometimes the point wasn't victory. Sometimes the point was making sure the right people lived to see tomorrow. He checked his rifle one final time, then knelt beside Emma. "Sweetheart, I need you to take Lucas to the root cellar. You remember where I showed you the hidden door behind the bookshelf?" Emma nodded, her dark eyes steady despite her tears. "There's food down there, blankets, and a radio. If something happens to me, you call the number I taught you and tell them Tommy Chen's niece needs help." Emma's chin lifted with a stubbornness that reminded Bill painfully of her uncle. "What about Luna? We can't leave her." "Luna's job is done, honey. She kept you safe. Now it's my turn." Bill touched the wooden wolf carving Emma still clutched. "That toy I made you, I carved it the night Tommy died, thinking about promises and protection and all the ways good people try to take care of each other. Luna lived that promise every day." Emma looked down at the she-wolf's peaceful face, then back at Bill. "Will you keep the promise too?" Before Bill could answer, the front door exploded inward. Marcus stood in the doorway, no longer bothering with his carefully constructed facade of concerned parenthood. His face was a mask of controlled rage, and the pistol in his hand was trained directly at Bill's chest. "Enough games, old man! Where are my children?" But the man's eyes, when they fell on Luna's body, showed something Bill hadn't expected: genuine grief. Marcus lowered his weapon slightly, staring at the she-wolf with an expression that looked almost human. "I didn't want this," Marcus said quietly, and for a moment his voice carried the weight of real emotion. The wolf, she wasn't supposed to fight back so hard. Animals are supposed to recognize superior force. Bill studied the man's face, seeing past the anger to something more complex underneath. "You really believe you're saving them, don't you?" Marcus's laugh held no humor. "Saving them. Harper, do you have any idea what happens to children like these in the system? Foster homes, abuse, neglect, aging out at 18 with nothing. At least with me, they have structure, education, purpose." His voice grew harder. "I give them everything my Sarah never had." The name hit Bill like a physical blow. "Sarah? Your daughter who died?" "Sarah didn't die," Marcus replied, and his voice carried the pain of absolute truth. "Sarah was taken, removed from my custody by social workers who didn't understand my methods, who called therapeutic discipline abuse. They put her with strangers who didn't love her enough to fix her problems." His grip tightened on the pistol. "She killed herself 3 months later. 7 years old, and she gave up because I wasn't there to protect her." Bill felt the pieces clicking together with terrible clarity. Marcus wasn't just an abuser. He was a man whose grief had metastasized into something monstrous, whose love had curdled into possession so complete that he couldn't distinguish between protection and imprisonment. "The other families," Bill said quietly. "How many others have there been?" Marcus's smile was sad and terrible. 12 families over 4 years. As single mothers, usually with trauma histories, always desperate enough to accept help without asking too many questions. I saved them from poverty, from instability, from the chaos that destroys children's potential." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I saved them from becoming Sarah." Behind Marcus, movement in the doorway revealed Janet Miller, the corrupt social worker, but her face was pale with horror. Bill realized she'd been listening to Marcus's confession, understanding for the first time the true scope of what she'd been enabling. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," Janet breathed. "You told me these were legitimate custody cases. You said you were helping these families reunite." Marcus turned toward her, and Bill saw madness flicker behind his eyes. "I am helping them. I'm giving these children what the system never gave Sarah: consistency, discipline, love that doesn't give up when things get difficult." His voice rose. "I'm creating the families that should have existed all along." That's when Emma stepped out from behind the bookshelf, Lucas in her arms, her small face set with determination that reminded Bill of soldiers half her age walking into certain death. "You're not my daddy," she said clearly, "and you don't know what love is." Marcus's gun swung toward her, and Bill moved without conscious thought, muscle memory from Vietnam overriding every consideration except the need to put his body between the weapon and the child. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around, but he kept moving forward. Emma's voice cut through the gunshot's echo. "Luna! Luna, help us!" The desperate cry seemed to hang in the air, and for a moment everyone in the cabin stood frozen. Then Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of sanity. "The wolf is dead, little girl. Nobody's coming to save you now." But Emma looked down at Luna's still form and said something that made the hair on Bill's neck stand up. "Luna told me something before she went to sleep. She said wolves never really die. They just change into something stronger." From outside came a sound that made Marcus's face go white with terror. The howling of wild wolves, dozens of them, their voices rising in a chorus that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. The pack had answered Luna's final call, drawn by bonds that transcended species and death itself. Marcus backed toward the door, his psychological training unable to process what was happening. He'd planned for human resistance, for legal challenges, for emotional manipulation. He hadn't planned for nature itself to rise up against him. "That's impossible," he whispered. But his voice shook with the understanding that sometimes impossible things happened when love and loyalty collided with evil. Bill struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his shoulder wound, and looked at Emma with something approaching awe. The 6-year-old stood holding her brother, surrounded by the ghost of a she-wolf's protection, facing down a madman with the quiet courage of someone who'd learned that love was stronger than fear. Outside, the howling grew closer, and Marcus Morrison finally understood that some promises transcended death, some bonds couldn't be broken by bullets, and some children carried protection that no amount of psychology or manipulation could overcome. The reckoning was coming, and it wore the face of wild justice. Fellow Americans, this story touches something deep in our hearts because it reminds us of what we've always believed about this great nation, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when love and duty call. Bill Harper represents every veteran who came home carrying invisible wounds, every grandparent who thought their purpose had ended, every person over 55 who's been told their best years are behind them. But sometimes, life gives us a second chance to be heroes, not with youth or strength, but with wisdom earned through pain and love deepened by loss. Emma's courage shows us that protection isn't about age or size, it's about the size of your heart and the strength of your convictions. Luna's sacrifice reminds us that loyalty and love transcend every boundary we think divides us. In a world that often makes our generation feel invisible, this story proves that our experience, our willingness to stand up for what's right, and our understanding of what truly matters can still change lives. Sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't youth or technology, it's an old man's promise kept, a child's trust given, and love that refuses to quit even when everything seems hopeless. What promise from your past still calls to your heart? Have you ever been surprised by your own courage when someone needed protection? Please share your thoughts in the comments below.